Are you an Eagles fan? Are you struggling to find another team to watch after the Birds won another Super Bowl? It's been 2 weeks since the parade and you need a new team. You can't watch the Sixers because why would you? March Madness, you only need to watch the last minute of those games. You tried to watch the Philly spring training games, but it's the same team from last year. Yuck! There's gotta be a better team. Well, try out the Philadelphia Flyers. Here at Broad Street Hockey, we've got you covered with our Flyers Guide for Eagles fans. Who's the Flyers version of Cooper DeJean? Why, it's Bobby Brink. What about an Italian coach? The Flyers have that too. So stay tuned, because if you're missing the exciting whites, the Flyers have a whole team of them.
Broad Street Hockey does not guarantee that all Flyers whites are exciting.
And here it is, your Flyers Guide for Eagles fans. The number one thing that anyone needs to know about the Flyers right now is the name Matvei Michkov. He's without question the most hyped player this team has had since Eric Lindros. Michkov has all the makings of a superstar, and fans should absolutely get in on the ground floor with this kid. But before we dive into Michkov and who his comp is on the Eagles, we gotta set the stage for the team overall. We'll get back to Big Meech right after. The Flyers right now are in an interesting position. The team's been rebuilding for a couple seasons now, and it's starting to feel like they're nearing their first big pivot in the rebuild. We've got young players with promising futures who may or may not reach their potentials, but we lack some clear-cut franchise players outside of Michkov. If you want to view things optimistically, this Flyers team could be in a similar spot as the 2020 Eagles, which isn't to say that the Flyers team is as bad as the 2020 Eagles, who went 4-11-1. It's more about where things went for the 2020 Eagles after that season. For one, there were a lot of players on that 2020 Eagles team who were still on the roster that just won the Super Bowl 3 weeks ago. If things break right, it's very possible that a lot of the players on this year's Flyers team could still be on the team if they become legit contenders in the next 3 or 4 years. Also, to draw another comparison, the Flyers could pivot to a new head coach this summer, similar to how the 2020 Eagles ended the Doug Peterson era, leading to the Nick Sirianni era after that 2020 season. The Flyers' current coach, John Tortorella, could very well retire at the end of the year or just take a position in the Flyers' front office. One other thing that draws a parallel is in 2020, the Eagles saw their first glimpses of Jalen Hurts and some of the flashes of his potential. The same could be said for this year's Flyers and the rookie year of Matvei Michkov. However, if the Flyers' rebuild is on the wrong track and some of these young players don't hit, they could be on a similar path to the 2015 Eagles. You know, the year with Sam Bradford. I know that the Eagles became competitive just 2 seasons after 2015, but they didn't exactly turn into a prolonged contender after 2015, which is what the Flyers are trying to become. We lean optimistic here at Broad Street Hockey, so we're going to hope for the best. Either way, it's a fun time to get reacquainted with the Flyers if you've taken a break. We've got Michkov, who's looking like a stud. The trade deadline is coming up on Friday the 7th, which is less than a week away. The NHL salary cap is starting to rise by huge numbers, and with Comcast as the owners, the Flyers are going to be able to outspend like the old days of Ed Snyder. Not to mention our GM, Danny Briere, and President of Hockey Operations, Keith Jones, seem motivated to make some free agency additions this summer. One last thing before I move back on to Michkov. If you want to keep informed on all that's to come and support what we're doing here at Broad Street Hockey, please go ahead and hit subscribe below this video. We're growing the channel in a big way, and we will keep you covered for everything Flyers going forward. There's 2 members of BSH that deserve special shout-outs for this video, Steve Jaco of our podcast Flyperbole, and Justin Goodhart of the Fly Guys podcast. Both of them were huge helps in drawing these comps and putting this video together, so go give these 2 beauties a listen on their podcasts, which you could find on our YouTube channel, as well as whatever podcast thingamajig that you use to listen to podcasts. Okay, on to Michkov. If Michkov develops into the star that we think he can become, he could be your A.J. Brown. Brown has been mostly dominant for the Eagles, he can take over games, and he's absolutely unstoppable on his best days. Michkov is just 20 years old and only 75% through his first season in the NHL, and he's already showing some of that same offensive dominance. If he keeps it up, he's going to be an incredible player. Not to mention, he talks shit, and he isn't afraid to go after guys when they go after him. The kid is a flyer. That said, the Flyers do have a glaring need in their offense right now, a stud who plays center. Michkov is a winger, so he doesn't have the same kind of responsibility as a center. This comparison isn't totally apples to apples, but you can think about a center in hockey somewhat similar to the QB in football. Except in hockey, it's not good enough to have a center who's a franchise star like Jalen Hurts. You need at least 2 other pretty good centers behind him. The Flyers have got some okay centers on the team right now, but nothing even close to a Jalen Hurts, or even someone like a Jared Goff, really. But we did just draft a center in the first round this past draft, Jett Luchanko, who played 4 games to start the year with the Flyers. He's back in junior hockey right now, but there's a good chance we see him by the end of March, coming back to play for the Flyers' AHL team, the Phantoms. It's too early to say what Jett will turn into, but most people think his ceiling is that of a solid second-line center, which you could probably equate to a guy like Jared Goff. Goff isn't the elite of the elite, but he's a solid QB who's gotten better over time. I don't think there's many people out there who see Luchanko as a guy who will be elite, but like I said earlier, in hockey you need more than just a Jalen Hurts, so if Luchanko's a Jared Goff, that's going to be a really useful player for us. And coming up at the draft in June, the Flyers have 3 first-round picks and 4 second-round picks, and there's a lot of good centers in this draft, so that's definitely something worth paying attention to. From there, we should talk about some of the Flyers' veterans on the team. I'm not going to go through all of them, just the guys who will probably be here when the Flyers start to contend for the Cup in a couple years. And it's worth mentioning that these next 4 guys have all been with the Flyers their entire careers and have lived through the ups and the many down seasons of the Flyers these past few years. First up, we've got Sean Couturier, who's the captain of the team. He missed almost 2 full seasons around 2022-2023 with back surgeries, and he's lost a bit of a step from where he was before the injuries. That said, he's going to remain on the team for a long time because of his contract. Think of him in a similar vein to guys like Jason Kelce, Fletcher Cox, and Brandon Graham. When the Flyers are contending for cups, Couturier will probably still be on the team as kind of your elder statesman who mentors the younger players on the team, and he's absolutely a player you want your young guys looking up to. Next up, Travis Konecny. He's the best player on the team right now until Michkov takes over that mantle. Konecny's another guy who's a Flyer through and through. Think of him similarly to CJ Gardner-Johnson, except he's been in Philly his entire career. Both guys are shit talkers who will get in your face, but at the end of the day, they're mostly lovable dudes, and Konecny's play more than backs up his shit talking. Next is Scott Laughton. He's a guy I thought would be here for a long time, but I should say that there's a chance he gets traded by the weekend. There's been a lot of trade chatter around Laughton for like the last 5 years, and Laughton pulled off an incredible troll job on Friday with this Last Supper photo. Laughton loves Philly, and he loves being a Flyer. Think of him similar to Lane Johnson. Both guys are universally loved and have their finger on the pulse of the fans in the city. If Laughton does get traded, I would love it if he came back when his contract expires in another year. Finally, Travis Sanheim. The best Eagles comp for him is probably Darius Slay. Both guys are mostly reliable on defense, but they can both get burned sometimes, and it'll make you want to pull your hair out. Overall, you can trust both guys more than you're worried about them. That said, Sanheim has taken a huge step these past 2 seasons, where Slay feels kind of the opposite. Finally, let's move on to the younger guys on the Flyers. Again, I'm only going to focus on guys who I think have a good chance to be part of the team for a while. First up is Tyson Foerster. It's Foerster's second full season in the league, and it feels like he's got a lot of promise and could very well break out in the next couple years. If he does hit that ceiling, he could end up being a guy as important as a guy like Devontae Smith. If you want to contend, having A.J. Brown and Smitty is a huge help, and Michkov and Foerster could end up with a pretty similar hierarchy and importance to the Flyers' success going forward. Another Flyer who's a bit older to be part of the younger guys grouping is Owen Tippett. Tippett's 26 years old, he can score goals, and he can absolutely fly on the ice. Last year, he had the highest recorded speed burst in the league. He's taken a big step since we acquired him from Florida in the Claude Giroux trade a few years back, but we're still waiting for him to put all of those tools together consistently, which is why his closest comp on the Eagles is probably Dallas Goedert at this time. You can see the tools and the skill. You just hope Tippett can turn those skills into a consistent part of his game, because we've got him signed for 7 more years after this season. And finally, Jamie Drysdale. We got Drysdale in the trade that sent Cutter Gauthier to Anaheim because he doesn't have what it takes to play in Philly. Drysdale is still young, he's about to turn 23, and he's got a ton of skill. but he's been really inconsistent throughout his career. We think his best Eagles comps are either Jordan Davis or Nolan Smith. Drysdale is similar to Jordan Davis in that they both are just scratching the surface of what they can do, and while they're both young, they have been around for a couple years. Drysdale and Nolan Smith feel like comps because of the insane amount of potential both guys have. And if they reach their potentials, each team's defense is going to be a handful to deal with because of their presence. Both of them have taken a little bit to get going, and you want to believe there's something special with them. So that's your guide to get you started. The Flyers probably won't make the playoffs this season, and they're probably going to need another year or two before they start contending, but it feels right now like they're on a good path, and at the very least, Michkov is appointment viewing. Let us know in the comments what you think of our comps and if you have better comps that you thought of, and stick around on our channel because we've got the trade deadline coming on Friday. We'll have a lot to evaluate once the season ends, and it sounds like the Flyers are going to try and make a splash in the offseason, not to mention again that we've got a ton of draft picks in this year's draft. Thanks for watching, y'all. We'll see you again real soon.